What's one secret you and a parent have kept from the other parental figure? When I was 10, my older brother, 12, was bullied in middle school because we were poor and wore payless our entire lives. He fought back one day and was suspended from school. When my mom asked what happened, he didn't want to hurt her feelings, so he lied. I told her what happened and she started to cry. The next day she took us to a shoe store and bought all 3 boys Nikes, which were very expensive, think Ken Griffey's. She made us promise to not tell our dad, and if he asked, they were super cheap on sale. She bought us Nikes 2 times a school year, even though they were way out of our budget, because she didn't want us to feel shitty at school. I love you, Mom. Edit. Thanks to the kind stranger for my first gold. I really didn't expect my story to resonate with so many people. I'm happy to report that I am now an adult in my 30s and financially stable, so now I get to return the favor and spoil my parents, especially my mom. My dad loves it when he finds change on the ground while traveling overseas. One day, he and I were walking behind my mom in an alleyway in Amsterdam, and he was elated because he kept finding euros laying around. A few years later my mom told me that she had been secretly dropping coins on the ground as she walked, so he'd be happy when he found them. He still doesn't know. My stepdad and mom broke up. The day that my mom left, taking me with her, I went back into the house to say goodbye. I got along well with him. My mom is a bit crazy. I was young, middle school age. He was devastated and broke down, at first, crying. He told me that he had never told anyone this, but the reason he had issues getting along with my mom was because he was assaulted as a child, and he was sorry. He made me promise not to tell her or anyone. I never did. I always wondered if I should tell her, but keeping his secret was the only thing I could do for him, and I still cared for him a lot, so I never told anyone. I wouldn't even post it here, but sadly he passed away some years ago now. It was really sad. He was a nice guy. But it never would have worked anyway with my mom. My mom worked days, and my dad was on midnight shift. So meals were my dad's responsibility that week. One day, instead of cooking dinner, he took me to a funeral of an old teacher of his that had passed away. So that I could eat those little sandwiches, cheese and desserts. My dad stopped drinking when I was around 8 because the doctor said he'd die within the year if he didn't. When I was around 12 to 13 years old, he confided in me that he wanted to kill himself about a year after he had stopped drinking. He obviously told me not to tell my mother. I don't think he really had anyone else he could go to with those thoughts. I still nag him to this day to seek therapy. I don't think he's properly faced his demons. Edit. Thank you for the overwhelming support. A lot of people mention panic attacks as common thing after getting off of alcohol. Yeah, he definitely had to go to the hospital a few times for panic attacks when he got sober. Never put 2 and 2 together. Thank you for that insight. I used to be mad that he put that on me as a kid. But as an adult I'm glad he told somebody. And he's still here, so that's what matters. My dad grew up pretty rich, but was the youngest of 13, so by the time he came of age there wasn't much for him. No big deal, worked his way through college. It was the 80s back when that was doable, and that's where met my mom. My mother grew up inching on the poverty line, and so when it was time for the wedding, my dad apparently really wanted her to pick absolutely any wedding dress on earth that she wanted, no matter the cost. My mom, having a tighter understanding of money, bought one that had already been worn. She apparently never told him that. They're both in their 50s now and made me swear to never tell him either. I rented Mike Tyson's Punch-Out when I was in 7th grade and kept it out until I owed $47. My mom slipped me the money to pay it off, so my dad wouldn't go crazy about the money, which was a lot of money for us back then. If he'd found out, he would have prohibited me from renting games for a while. I don't think he knows about it even now. I came from a super strict religious household where I wasn't allowed to watch about 99% of what my classmates were watching. I thought the reins would loosen a little bit when I was in high school, but they really didn't. It was pretty miserable. When I was a high school senior, South Park was pretty big, and I hated that all of my friends were watching it and I never got any of the references. My dad thought it was hysterical and thought my mom's rules were dumb, but kind of went with it anyway. However, South Park came on after my mom was already asleep, so that became our thing. On South Park nights, my dad and I would stay up and watch it together. We did this my whole senior year and even my first few years when I came home from college on breaks. Yes, the same rules were still in place then. Side ot. It was kind of a silly little secret, but those are some of the best times with my dad just laughing and catching up during the commercials. When I was about 8, I was helping my dad put up Christmas lights on the second floor roof. This was the 80s. Safety didn't exist yet. He told me to get another strand, and I walked to the edge. The roof was pretty flat, and I straight up slipped and fell off the roof and landed on the picnic table on the ground floor. My dad had no idea that I fell off until I yelled back I'm okay. He made me swear that I'd never tell my mom. And that was the last year we ever put lights up on the roof. Edit, a letter also, yeah. My dad was absolutely freaked out after he turned around and didn't see me when I called out. As others have pointed out, you were pretty flexible at that age, and what helped me was that I was scrawny. I couldn't have weighed more than 60 pounds at the time. I didn't even break the table. But this one time I forgot to lock my door one night and a drunk guy walked into my place. After I, politely, kicked him out, I called my dad and he was like, yeah, no, don't tell your mother, you'll give her a heart attack. My mom's cancer diagnosis. My mother was a very heavy alcoholic, but she developed alcohol-related dementia, known as Korsakoff, edit for SP, syndrome. She wouldn't remember things within a few hours of telling her, so when she was informed in the hospital of her terminal lung cancer and secondary bone cancer she forgot and couldn't understand why she was so ill. We had to get home care help. This was in the couple of months leading up to last Christmas during the pandemic, so she passed away peacefully at home, and myself and my dad created a narrative that the nurses and care staff in to help her shower, wash, medication, etc. were all there to help her get better and to get her back on her feet in full health. She happily accepted the care and enjoyed her time with the carers and nurses who attended. Then just before Christmas passed away peacefully in her sleep, not knowing she was dying but being looked after by her friends and family. Edit for grammar reasoning, edit 2 for spelling, thanks to EDENSTEDEN 22 Lou. First time I got drunk at a party. I was hammered and was scared to take a cab. Then I remembered my mom telling me I could always call her for help and she'd be there with no consequences. I called her and she picked me up. All she did was make sure I was safe and had enough water to not get as bad a hangover as I was going to. No blaming me for waking her up at 3 a.m. No chiding, just telling me she was proud of me for calling her for help. My dad would most likely have a panic attack at the thought of me having been drunk, still thinks I was picked up because I was sleepy instead. Thanks, Mom. Had one of these up until recently. It's not entirely within the scope of the question, but a funny tale is a funny tale. I was going on a senior class trip and had saved up some money to splurge a bit while I was there. My family had very little money back then, which is why I made it a point to save up for myself so that my parents wouldn't have to. A few days prior, my dad says, hey, here's a few $100. Have a great time and make some lasting memories. Don't tell your mother. I, naturally, agreed and didn't tell my mother. The very next day, my mom says, hey, here's a few $100. Have a great time and make some lasting memories. Don't tell your father. I, naturally, agreed and didn't tell my father. The trip was friggin' amazing. I was able to do way more than I had planned and was able to help a few of my friends do the same. I told my parents that it was amazing, and each of them separately gave me the old wink wink nudge nudge and were really happy for me. Decades later, I was visiting my family and the subject of doing don't tell the other parents stuff came up since I have kids of my own now, and I told them about how they had both given me the extra money for the trip and how I was more than happy to not tattle on them to each other. They looked at each other, all comically wide-eyed, and laughed their asses off, swatting at each other's arms and stuff.